I think it's best if we actually just invite whoever to kind of unmute themselves and then just ask the question. I know there's probably a lot in there, but yeah. So was it Stephen? Is it?
I think his question was answered. So maybe you're right.
Okay.
If there's someone out there who hasn't had their question in from the chat answered yet, do jump in.
Yeah, just unmute yourself. Anybody that has a question, we'll just kind of take it organically. That was probably an overwhelming amount of content. I apologize. But yeah.
I actually see a question somewhere Elizabeth asked about the concrete that was used. I guess that was answered in the chat, but maybe you could also clarify for others that when you substitute concrete with other alternatives, does it affect the mechanical performance of concrete?
No. So in this case, we're looking at it's the same concrete strength. So it'll still achieve the same concrete strength. One of the concerns that sometimes people have with using more fly ash or slag is that it could potentially affect the curing time on these projects. And so you need to optimize for that for each building element. So for example, on your foundation, maybe you can relax it to 56-day strength requirement, and you can have higher SCMs. For other elements, maybe you can't go as high. So it is something to optimize, but the things that I've modeled are realistic, like what can be done on projects. So it's not going with just the overly optimistic, 56-day mixes for every element of the building, for example.
Great. I guess I'll stay quiet in case somebody wants to jump in and ask questions. And if not, I can throw another question that I found interesting.
I have a question. When will the embodied carbon guidelines be available for the City of Vancouver?
So I think Patrick and right now is working on that and updating a draft on that. And then once that's ready, then we will do we'll release that and then do an additional round of getting external feedback from that. And then yeah, so I'm
not sure if Patrick is still on the call, but he has mentioned that by the end of 2022 is the timeline for the first version to be released. He has responded that on the chat.
Yeah, exactly. Anyone else?
Patrick? Hello?
Oh, hi, yeah.
Yes, I have a question. You mentioned that MEP today is considered as one of the blind spots. What is the main challenge of having numbers about MEP contribution when it comes to the embodied carbon?
What's the main challenge of including MEP? It's because there's not a lot of great data. So like manufacturers have not produced environmental product declaration, or I mean, very, very few manufacturers have produced environmental product declaration data for this. So we really need to kind of, as an industry, push for greater transparency on this front and request this type of information. But I think a big part of it is we just don't have a lot of data availability on this. So the CIBC TM65.1 methodology that I mentioned that was developed in the UK, that methodology is kind of like a stopgap measure, like an interim measure for how do we estimate those emissions right now? Like, for example, if we know material quantities, can we kind of come up with high-level emission factors for these different materials and kind of come up with some high-level estimate from these emissions? But it's definitely not as accurate as opposed to actually getting the actual data from the manufacturers. So it's a data issue.
A note, Anthony, too.
Yeah.
TM65 is the method. TM65.1 is the study.
The study, yes. Sorry about that. Thanks for the correction. Okay, anyone else?
Hi, Anthony, I have a question. For the models and the studies that you're using to compare one versus another, are you accounting for any additional height maybe that comes from deep beams that are required through the through timber beams? Or
sorry, are you talking about in the benchmarking studies, or are you talking about in the case studies that we were talking about?
In benchmarking and case studies, like case studies comparative to one to another.
The case studies, well, the few case studies that I showed, those are actual projects, so they are mass timber projects, so it's modeled properly there. For like in terms of the mass timber variants and whatnot. On the benchmarking, those are statistical benchmarks, right? So they're not. I'm not specifying like what the design of this building is. These are based on like LCA. It's an aggregation of many LCA studies. And so some of those LCA studies have mass timber, some don't, some it's across the board, but it's more of a statistical kind of average.
Okay, cool, thanks.
Yeah. Anyone else? Oh, I think we have a, yeah, maybe we can use the hand up process.
Anthony, it's Bronwyn here, if you can hear me.
Sure, yeah.
Hi, thanks for a great study and presentation. Question I have is, were you able to look at the integration of operational with embodied carbon in the same model? Because I've been playing around with a pH ribbon tool, and it seems actually being able to look at those in unison seems to be having a pretty interesting impact, because, you know, direct substitution isn't always the same, doesn't always have the same impact on thermal and operational outcomes. So I'm just curious to see if you were able to look at that at all and whether that's playing a role.
I haven't, but I think that's definitely like a useful next step potentially. For the purpose of this study, there was, we were mainly focused on the embodied carbon piece, and also to kind of look at it at a province-wide scope. And so to the extent that I included operational carbon, it was more just looking at what are the current operational carbon emissions, you know, based on our provincial GHG inventory. I'm sure there's other work that's being done at the province that's kind of looking at future projections on operational carbon emissions and what the impact of our different policies on that front will do, like implementing. But I think there's definitely room to kind of tie those two approaches together, and to maybe even look at this on an individual building basis or across different building archetypes to see what the impact of these different kind of trade-offs or how do you optimize for both for these different archetypes. So that's future work. Okay, I think somebody had a Harsh Maru.
Yeah, hi Anthony.
Hi.
First, such an amazing presentation you gave. I have a question about biogenic carbon accounting. So, like a lot of industries are considering biogenic carbon as a carbon offset or achieving net zero. So I have a critical thinking about, like, do you think like there is any regulation to check if the industries which are considering the biogenic carbon has a legit view, or how they actually surely say like if this number is legit, how much it can offset?
Yeah, so I have not looked too deeply on the offsetting side. I think there's definitely room to ensure that there's more robust approaches applied there to make sure that there's not a lot of people making like all sorts of different claims. But the challenge is that this is actually a really complex topic. So I think one of the things I wanted to highlight was that this area deserves a lot more attention, and we need to, even though it's a complex topic, we need to actually develop a much stronger understanding on this front. And this will require the expertise from many people that have a lot more experience and expertise on the forest sector.
Maybe something to add is that, as far as I'm aware, currently there's no offset credit for wood that is used in building. There are offset credit for forestation and the activities in the forest, but right now people wouldn't be able to get offset credit for materials used in buildings, as far as I know. So it's for the same concern that you're mentioning, that it's not yet accepted as a offset measure.
Thanks.
Yeah, I agree with you, but still, like EPDs are generated by the manufacturer, so they can still claim that their product is more sustainable than other products. Maybe they can manipulate the data they are presenting, because not many people are expert in this to understand what is going on behind this data.
Yeah, I mean, I think, there's definitely more work that needs to be done on this. I don't know how else to summarize that. Yeah.
I think so. Thank you.
No problem. Anyone else?
I have a question, Anthony, about the absolute versus relative baselines that you had touched upon. I'm just wondering if there's any argument against having more granular material-specific absolute baselines while continuing to sort of have a relative target reduction. So basically, reducing the room for interpretation, especially given that the geographical region is limited to Greater Vancouver. So there's the absolute targets and baselines, and then there's the relative percent reduction over a certain baseline that you come across. Like, is there any possibility of having granular material-specific baselines for each high impact material?
Yeah, I definitely think so. Or actually, Zahra, would you want to take that?
I just wanted to mention what you're talking about is similar to the buy clean or procurement policies. So that's exactly how they approach it. Instead of asking for a whole building, not instead, maybe in addition, but a type of policy is exactly what you're saying, looking into very high impact materials that are used in buildings, and then starting requiring EPDs, and then starting preferring low carbon products. And in a few years, you will start putting a cap saying the government wouldn't purchase that type of material with impacts higher than that. So yes, I think it's a very effective approach, and it can be combined with whole building LCA, because that is looking into procurement, whereas with the whole building LCA, we are starting with looking into the design.
Okay, that's very insightful. Thank you.
Thanks for the question. Any other questions? Going once, going twice.
Anthony.
Yeah.
It's Will here from WSP. So, you talk about doubling the building stock over the next 50 years or so, or is it to 2050? Those assumptions are obviously based on some, I guess, projections, probably from developers and so on. And we're seeing an emphasis now on sufficiency requirements in the IPCC and in Europe. Do you think that it's realistic in terms of trying to meet our 1.5 degree warming limits while also trying to double the building stock?
Oh, I 100% agree. We need to figure out how to actually reduce the amount of new construction. And I think actually that statistic was actually developed a while ago. So who knows, maybe that's actually changed a bit. I mean, even if you look at what's happening in China right now, like their rate of new construction is changing quite dramatically due to various factors, right? So these things I think these trajectories, these projections can very quickly be changed due to different conditions. But I definitely think we need to focus on the sufficiency side. And yeah, it would be very challenging to do this all with that amount of new construction. But I think we need to tackle it on all fronts. We need to look at how do we kind of have lower carbon material designs and material efficiency measures, and also, retrofitting where we can. Yeah, all of that. I think, Zahra, did you have something?
I would only add that you had a very great example in your presentation looking into intensity per person. So there are other approaches that we are looking into. When we are looking into Canada's emission, don't look into a nation, but look into per person. So there are definitely ways to put value on the budget of every person, and that maybe is a great approach to look into that.
Except, it's still an absolute amount of carbon that we're putting into the atmosphere that's causing the problem. So while the population is rising, going to a per person metric doesn't necessarily solve the problem. I would like to see a 10-year pause on construction until our building materials catch up to give us...
Well, I think that's a very great point, but then we are also getting into the whole equity topic as well. So
of course,
it conflicts.
It is, but we're in the developed world here. I think we could probably say that we could extend the life of our existing building stock by 10 years without much of an investment. But anyway, that's a bit of a different, out of scope debate, perhaps.
I would also add that there are ongoing studies right now through like CSA and Circular Economy Leadership of Canada looking into the circularity practices. And I think that's exactly why at the beginning I was mentioning that quantitative analysis are great, but we shouldn't lose sight of other things. So exactly what you're talking about.
Awesome. Thank you. Tracy?
Hi. First, thank you for an amazing presentation. 2 hours seems like a long time, but it's interesting the way throughout. So I just wanted to thank you and Zahra for that. Branching off of what Will noted, you know, a lot of new prop tech industries and sustainable industries are advertising to build a lot more because they're leveraging these projected new constructions, and the need for affordable housing. Now, I know that Vancouver has a specific problem for that, and I'm just curious about what your understanding is so far with how these industries have leveraged these statistics that are often output by real estate and developers organizations that obviously profit from that. How you see or understand these companies using those statistics to encourage building more when that may not be the answer.
I mean, I don't know that I have any particular insight more than what most people. Zahra, you want to? Sure.
I would just mention, Tracy, that you're right. Some studies are biased, but that's why I mentioned that there are studies that are recent and ongoing right now through third parties who don't have a stake in it. There's always challenges to make sure a study is completely impartial, but I'm just saying that the government is aware of it, and there are studies that are happening looking into the retrofit versus new buildings. I mean, there has been many done, but I'm just saying that we are not landed on what the development industry is saying is correct face value. We are looking into it. So the more people like you and I and everybody pushes on that, the more we'll see awareness on it.
That's great. Yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing more of that because I think the construction industry is running away a little bit with the information that they've had recently. So
yeah, and I think a lot of this also needs to be done more at the local level to like understand like the demand drivers and whatnot. Like, you know, I think, for example, in the city of Vancouver, a lot of the projects are rezoning projects, right? So like we're actually trying to build greater density on plots of land that are like single family homes or whatnot, right? And we're trying to add a lot more density. And so like, that's a very different equation when you're thinking about, you know, like, can you retrofit? Yeah, maybe you can retrofit for some of these sites, but then does that address some of these other factors around like, you know, we need to increase the housing stock for certain affordability issues or whatever. But like, it's a big, broad topic, but the point I'm trying to say is that not that any particular side is right, but that we need to have a more localized lens on these to really understand where do we really need this and where is it like, where is there actually potential for sufficiency and other measures.
Hopefully where these studies will end is at least requiring an embodied carbon lens when we look into retrofit versus new construction. Doesn't mean we always land on retrofit because we may have other needs, but doing that study is a good first step.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much.
No problem. Any further questions? I recognize that was a long time with no breaks in between. I apologize. It was a very dense presentation, but thank you all for being here for this. Caroline, do you want to?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you. Thank you, Anthony. Thank you, Zahra, for presenting this. This was a huge amount of information. There's a lot to digest, and we'll post information and the recording of this presentation as soon as possible, so you can all go back and look through any details that you need, and look forward to seeing everybody at the next event, which should be sometime mid-September.
Yeah, 1 second. I think, or sorry. Well, I think Matt raised his hand, so maybe.
Yeah, I just realized I did have a question. As far as the report goes that you provided to the province, is that publicly available already or going to be made publicly available? Do you know?
So these slides will be made publicly available, but the report that Mantle worked on, I believe currently is not going to be publicly available.
Okay, yeah, there's a ton of information on those slides, and some of it is quite small to read.
Oh yeah. So yeah, you'll see the slides, and it'll take some time to kind of plow through as well. So yeah, it'll be made available, the slides.
Thanks.
Thanks everyone.
Okay, great. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Cheers.